I drove through the familiar street, the golden sunset spilling long shadows over the low, squat rooftops. The old delivery truck creaked and groaned every time I pressed the gas, as if it were as exhausted as I was. The last package of the day sat haphazardly on the passenger seat, a small box wrapped in brown paper, its address scribbled in handwriting that looked like a child's. I glanced at it, then at the clock. 6:30 p.m. Mom had texted me 3 times, her tone as usual. "Jacob, come home for dinner tonight. Don't keep me waiting." Not a single word asking if I was tired or busy. Just a command, as if I were a cog in the monotonous schedule she'd already mapped out. My name is Jacob, 28 years old, a delivery driver for a small logistics company in Portland. The job isn't bad, but it's hardly something to boast about. Every day I leave home before the sun rises, crisscrossing the city, delivering packages to every corner and alley, and returning home when the sky is pitch black. The pay is enough to get by, enough to rent a small room on the outskirts of town and occasionally send a little money back to my parents. But in my family's eyes, I'm nothing. Not because I've done anything wrong, but because I'm not Jason. Jason, my younger brother, 3 years my junior, is the pride of the family. He has a dazzling smile, the kind that makes people trust him at first glance. Jason talks like an actor, always knowing how to make people laugh, how to make them overlook his mistakes. Since we were kids, Mom called him the golden boy, while I, no matter how hard I tried, was just the clumsy older brother. Mom once said right in front of me that Jason was born to do great things, while you just need to work hard and that's enough. Those words sounded gentle, but they stabbed into my heart like a rusty knife, stinging every time I recalled them. I don't entirely blame Jason, at least not completely. He didn't choose to be the favorite. But sometimes I wonder, if I'd been treated fairly, would I be living a different life? A life where I didn't wake up every day feeling like I'm the shadow of my own brother? Today is Friday, the day Mom always insists I come home for dinner. Family needs to gather, she says, but I know that gathering is never about me. It's Jason's stage where he talks about his grand plans, his startup projects that I never fully understand. I just sit there, eating cold rice, nodding when Mom asks me something and trying not to notice when Dad brags about Jason to the neighbors over the phone. I pulled over in front of a convenience store a few blocks from home to deliver the last package. The evening breeze was cool, but sweat still clung to my forehead. The recipient was a middle-aged woman with bright red dyed hair, who thanked me with a weary smile. "You work hard, don't you?" she said, and I just nodded, unsure how to respond. I'm not used to rare compliments like that. When I got back to the truck, my phone buzzed, a text from Mom. "Jason says he has a big surprise tonight. Come home early, don't keep the family waiting." I sighed and shoved the phone into my pocket. A big surprise. Probably another grandiose story from Jason. A new project, a promising relationship, or maybe just a new pair of shoes that Mom will gush over. I'm not jealous, really, but I'm tired. Tired of always having to play the understanding older brother, the one who's never allowed to complain. My parents' house is in an old neighborhood where the houses are packed close together, their walls stained and their iron fences rusted. I parked in front of the gate, turned off the engine, and sat still for a moment. The sound of distant car horns mixed with the barking of a dog somewhere nearby. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw my tired eyes, dark circles etched deep as if I hadn't slept enough in years. "Just one dinner, Jacob," I told myself. "Eat, then go home." Stepping inside, the rich aroma of braised pork hit me. Mom was bustling in the kitchen, Dad was lounging in his armchair watching TV, and Jason, he wasn't there yet. I greeted Dad, but he only grunted, his eyes glued to the screen. Mom turned around, looked me up and down, and frowned. "You're working late again, aren't you? Look at that dirty shirt. Go wash your face before Jason gets home and sees his brother looking so sloppy." I nodded and trudged upstairs. In my old room, now just a storage space for random junk, I spotted an old framed photo on a shelf. It was Mom, Dad, Jason, and me, taken when I was 15 and Jason was 12. I stood behind him, my arm around his shoulders, both of us grinning brightly. Back then, I thought I was the big brother, his protector. Now I don't know what I am anymore. When I came back downstairs, Jason had arrived. He was sitting at the dining table, his white dress shirt crisp and his hair slicked back with gel. "Yo, big bro," he called out, flashing a wide grin. "Long time no see. You doing okay?" I nodded and sat across from him. Jason always called me big bro in that joking tone, as if I were a side character in his story. Dinner began. Mom brought out the braised pork and placed it right in front of Jason. "Your favorite, right?" she asked, her voice soft like she was talking to a child. Jason nodded and launched into his big project. Some crypto startup sounding impressive, but I didn't understand much beyond the buzzwords he threw around. Blockchain, investment, the future. Dad nodded along, his eyes lighting up. "This kid's got vision," he said, then turned to me. "What about you, Jacob? Delivery job still going okay?" "It's fine," I replied curtly. I didn't want to elaborate. Even if I did, they wouldn't really listen. "Fine's good," Mom chimed in, but her tone carried a hint of pity, like she was consoling a loser. "Just keep working hard and things will be okay." I swallowed a bite of rice, trying to ignore the way she emphasized working hard, as if that's all I'm capable of. Jason kept talking, his voice growing more animated. I noticed he looked thinner than the last time I saw him. His eyes slightly red, his fingers tapping restlessly on the table like he couldn't sit still. Something felt off, but I wasn't sure what. Then, as Mom was praising Jason's business talent, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his face tightening for a split second, then stood up. "Gotta take this call," he said, disappearing into the backyard. I watched him go, a sense of unease creeping in. Jason had been getting calls like this a lot lately. Always secretive, always brief, always followed by a forced smile when he returned. The last time I'd seen him in the backyard talking about goods and payments. When I asked, he brushed it off with a laugh, saying it was just business. But this time I noticed Mom watching him too. Her brows slightly furrowed, though she quickly turned to me and changed the subject. "Jacob, have you sent money home this week?" she asked, her tone as casual as if she were asking about the weather. I nodded, though it stung inside. "I send money home faithfully every month, but I've never heard a word of thanks." Meanwhile, Jason never has to contribute a dime, yet he always has cash for new clothes, dining out, or driving that sleek sports car no one knows how he affords. Jason returned, his smile back in place, but I noticed his hand trembling slightly as he picked up his chopsticks. "Everything okay?" I asked, trying to sound normal. He looked at me, his eyes flashing with something. Worry, maybe anger, I couldn't tell. "All good, big bro. Just work stuff." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Dinner ended and I washed the dishes as usual, though Mom never asks Jason to do it. As I dried my hands preparing to leave, Jason pulled me aside into a corner of the room. "Hey, you free tomorrow?" he asked, his voice low. "What's up?" I replied, a bit surprised. He hesitated, then shrugged. "Nothing big, just... Could you help me deliver something? It's small, won't take long." I looked at him, that uneasy feeling rising again. "Deliver what?" I asked. He grinned and clapped my shoulder. "Just a package, don't worry, I'll explain tomorrow." He walked off before I could press further, leaving me standing there with a bad feeling I couldn't shake. That night, lying on the single bed in my cramped rented room, I couldn't sleep. Images of Jason with stacks of cash, those secretive phone calls, kept swirling in my head. I told myself I was overthinking, that he was just a spoiled little brother, not a criminal. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. And I was afraid, not for Jason, but for myself. Because I knew if something went wrong, I'd be the one left holding the bag. The next morning, I woke to the shrill buzz of my alarm clock, like a trapped insect screaming for release. 5:30 a.m., the sky still pitch black. My cramped rented room reeked of stale coffee and the damp mustiness of stained walls. I lay still for a moment, trying to recall last night's dream, but all I could see was Jason. His forced smile, his evasive eyes, his words from last night, "Deliver something," lingered in my mind like a discordant note that refused to fade. I shook my head, telling myself I was overthinking. Jason might be a spoiled brat, but he wouldn't get involved in anything too bad, would he? I threw on an old t-shirt, grabbed my baseball cap, and headed out to the truck. Another day, another loop. But today, I felt heavier than usual. Something was off, like hearing a strange noise in the house in the dead of night. While eating breakfast, I texted Jason a short message. "What's that package? I'm busy today." No reply. I shoved the phone into my pocket, started the truck, and got to work. The day passed in a blur of honking horns, gasoline fumes, and dusty streets. I delivered package after package, trying not to think about Jason. But every time my phone buzzed, I flinched, hoping it was him, only to see messages from the company or Mom, reminding me to come home for dinner tonight. "Jason has something important to discuss," she wrote, always Jason. I sighed, wondering if there'd ever be a day when my family talked about me, even just once. By the afternoon, Jason finally texted back, "Big bro, swing by the house at 6 p.m. It's just a small package. Just help me deliver it, thanks." I frowned, my thumb hovering over the screen, tempted to ask more, but I let it go. Maybe it was just something for his project. I didn't want to argue or hear Mom scold me for being jealous of my little brother. "All right," I replied, then pocketed the phone. As the sunset fell, I drove toward my parents' house. The familiar street now felt strange, like it was hiding a secret. I parked at the end of the alley, checking the truck's cargo area out of habit. Everything was as usual. A few leftover boxes, a toolbox, and a half-empty water bottle. I closed the hatch, locked the truck, and walked inside. The smell of beef stew wafted from the kitchen, mingling with Mom's muttering about Jason being late again. Dad was in his armchair, flipping through a newspaper, but I knew he wasn't really reading. He just wanted to look busy to avoid talking to me. "Jacob, you're here?" Mom called from the kitchen, her voice cheerful but tinged with something forced. "Go wash your face. Jason will be back soon and we'll eat." A little later, Jason showed up. He was wearing a black hoodie, a departure from his usual polished look. His eyes were bloodshot, like he'd been up for nights on end. "Yo, big bro," he called, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. I sat down, studying him. "Where's the package?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. He blinked, then grinned. "Oh, I'll give it to you after dinner. No rush." Dinner began, but the atmosphere was heavier than usual. Mom kept asking Jason about his crypto project, but he answered vaguely, his eyes glued to his phone. Dad stayed silent, nodding only when Mom praised Jason. I ate without tasting anything, the beef stew sticking in my throat. "Jason, are you okay?" Mom asked, her voice tinged with worry. He nodded, but I noticed his hand gripping his phone tightly under the table. Then everything happened so fast I could barely process it. The piercing wail of police sirens cut through the air from the end of the alley, sharp as a knife. Heavy footsteps followed, then urgent pounding on the door. Mom jumped up, her face pale. "What's going on?" she screamed, rushing to the door. I looked at Jason, but he didn't lift his head, just sat there, still clutching his phone. The door flew open and 3 police officers stormed in, their dark blue uniforms and cold eyes commanding the room. "Jacob Miller," one of them barked, his voice hard as steel. I nodded, my heart pounding. "We need to check your truck. Open the cargo area." I stood, my legs like lead. "What's this about?" I asked, but the officer only repeated, "Open the cargo area." I led them to the truck, Mom and Dad trailing behind. Mom's face was ashen and Dad muttered something about a mistake. Jason didn't follow, but I saw him standing at the door, his silhouette faint under the streetlight. I opened the cargo hatch, my heart hammering so hard I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. One officer leaned in and pulled out a small plastic bag filled with smaller packets of white powder. I froze as if the blood in my veins had stopped flowing. "What's this?" the officer asked, holding up the bag. I shook my head, my voice breaking. I don't know, that's not mine." But their eyes didn't believe me. They cuffed me, the metal biting into my wrists. Mom screamed, but not to defend me. "This has to be a mistake. My son wouldn't do this," she wailed, but her eyes weren't on me. They were on Jason. They pushed me into the police car, my mind spinning. In the brief moment before the door slammed shut, I saw Jason standing there, eyes downcast, refusing to meet mine. And I knew in that instant that the package he'd asked me to deliver wasn't harmless. At the detention center, the fluorescent lights burned my eyes. I sat on a cold metal bench, my hands still cuffed. The officer across from me spoke in a flat, rehearsed tone. "Jacob, we found a large quantity of drugs in your truck. You know what they are, don't you? Tell the truth. It'll be better for you." "I don't know," I repeated, my voice hoarse. "I swear I don't know where they came from." But my words carried no weight. I was just a delivery driver. No money, no power, no one to back me up. Then my parents arrived. They stood behind the glass, Mom crying, Dad frowning with his hands in his pockets. The officer left, leaving me alone with them. I looked at Mom, waiting for an explanation, an apology. But she only whispered, her voice trembling. "Jacob, you have to take the fall. Jason can't go to jail. He has a future ahead of him. You're stronger. The lawyer will handle it and you'll get a reduced sentence." I stared at her, feeling like my heart was being crushed. "What did you say?" I asked, my voice breaking. Dad cut in, his tone firm. "Listen to your mother. This is for the family. Jason wouldn't survive it. You can." I looked at them, the people I called my parents, but now they felt like strangers. No apology, no explanation. They just wanted me to take the blame. I thought of Jason, of his eyes last night, the stacks of cash, the secretive calls. And then it hit me. This wasn't an accident. It was a setup, and I was the pawn. "I'm not pleading guilty," I said, my voice calm in a way that surprised even me. Mom froze, then burst into tears. "Jacob, you can't do this. Do you want to destroy this family?" I didn't answer. For the first time in my life, I looked at them and felt no need to please them anymore. The next morning, I was taken to the courtroom at the Multnomah County Courthouse in Portland. The air inside was frigid, despite the July heat scorching the world outside. I sat on the defendant's bench, my worn-out sneakers scraping against the polished wooden floor, my hands still numb from the cuffs I'd worn since last night. In front of me was Howard, the court-appointed lawyer, a middle-aged man with disheveled hair and glasses slipping down his nose, flipping through a stack of papers as if he knew nothing about my case. He'd met me for exactly 15 minutes before the hearing began, his voice flat and rehearsed. "Jacob, you should plead guilty. The evidence is clear. Plead guilty, and you'll get a lighter sentence." I shook my head, trying to explain that the drugs in my truck weren't mine, that I'd been set up, but Howard just shrugged. "You say that, but the jury won't care," he said, then turned away, his eyes glued to his phone. I looked out at the public seating, hoping to see Mom or Dad. But only Jason was there, sitting in the far corner, head bowed, hands clasped tightly as if hiding something. He didn't look at me, not once. My parents didn't show up. I pictured them at home in the familiar kitchen, still tinged with the smell of BBQ, probably comforting each other that everything will be fine. But fine for who? Certainly not for me. The prosecutor, a petite woman with a voice sharp as a blade, stood up. She called me Jacob Miller, 28 years old, delivery driver, but the way she said it made me sound like a seasoned criminal. "The defendant used his job to conceal drug trafficking activities," she declared, holding up the bag of white powder, the damning evidence, before the jury. I wanted to scream that it wasn't mine, that I had no idea where it came from, but Howard put a hand on my shoulder and whispered, "Don't do anything stupid." I clenched my jaw, a wave of helplessness crashing over me. The trial dragged on for 3 days, but to me it felt like an endless nightmare. Howard did little beyond sitting quietly, occasionally jotting a few notes. The prosecutor, meanwhile, was relentless, presenting photos of my truck, the bag of drugs, and my delivery records as if they proved I ran a sophisticated criminal network. The defendant had the opportunity, the means, and the motive, she said, her voice icy. Motive? I was just a driver, working from dawn to dusk, sending money home to my parents, dreaming of a small coffee shop. What motive could I possibly have? I testified that I knew nothing about the drugs, that someone had set me up. But when the prosecutor asked who, I fell silent. I thought of Jason, his evasive eyes that night, my mother's whispered words. Jason wouldn't survive it. I wanted to point at him, to say my own brother had put me here, but I couldn't. Not because I wanted to protect him, but because I knew, even if I spoke, no one would believe me. I was just Jacob, the clumsy older brother, the one my family never took seriously. On the final day of the trial, the judge, a silver-haired man with a stern face, delivered the verdict. Jacob Miller, you are sentenced to 2 years in prison for possession of a controlled substance with intent to distribute. The gavel struck the bench like a guillotine. I stood frozen, my mind blank. Jason was still there in the back row, but he didn't look up. As I was led away, I turned, hoping to catch his eye, hoping for a hint of remorse. But he just stood and left the courtroom, his figure disappearing behind the heavy wooden door. The iron door slammed shut, the clang of metal echoing like a hammer blow. I stood in the middle of a cold cell, the flickering fluorescent light casting shadows on the gray concrete walls. The stench of mildew and stale sweat hit me, making my stomach churn. My hands, still numb from the cuffs, hung limp as I sat on the edge of the bed, a thin mattress on a steel frame, hard as stone. This was Multnomah County Jail, Portland, Oregon. My new home for the next 2 years. Me, Jacob Miller, 28 years old, delivery driver, now a convicted felon for drug possession with intent to distribute. A crime I had nothing to do with. Prison was a world utterly alien to me. The first days were a nightmare. I didn't know how to survive here. My fellow inmates eyed me like fresh prey, their gazes half curious, half threatening. A burly guy with tattoos covering his arms always stood in the corner of the yard, watching me as if deciding whether to start trouble. I kept to myself, avoiding eye contact, never lingering on anyone too long. But every night, lying on that hard mattress, I couldn't sleep. Images of Mom crying, Dad's silence, and Jason's bowed head played on a loop, like a movie I couldn't stop. I asked myself what I'd done wrong. I'd worked hard, sent money home, tried to be a good brother. So why was I here while Jason was free, probably still eating dinner with Mom and Dad, spinning tales about his grand crypto projects? The first week I barely spoke to anyone. I ate the bland trays of food, dry bread, stewed beans, and some nameless sauce, then retreated to my cell, curling up in the dark. I thought about my dream of opening a coffee shop, a small place filled with the warm aroma of roasted beans where I could be myself, not Jason's shadow. But that dream now felt as fanciful as a fairy tale. I had nothing. No money, no family, no future. Then one day during yard time, I met Carl. He was about 50 with salt and pepper hair and deep-set eyes, a scar running across his left cheek. Carl sat alone on a concrete bench reading a tattered book, looking like he didn't belong here. I hadn't planned to talk, but he looked at me, squinted, and said, "You're not a drug dealer, are you?" I flinched, unsure how to respond. "How do you know?" I asked, my voice raspy from days of silence. Carl smiled, a tired but sharp smile. "I used to be an accountant for a crew in Seattle. I know how to read people. You've got the look of someone who got screwed over." He closed his book and handed it to me. It was a basic law book, its cover worn and torn, but filled with handwritten notes. "Read it," Carl said. "If you want to get out of here and do something, you've got to learn how to play their game." I took the book, unsure if I should trust him. But that night, in the dim light of my cell, I opened it. The yellowed pages detailed cases, criminal law, and how the justice system worked. I read line by line, word by word, as if it were the only way to stay sane. I didn't understand everything, but each night I read a little more, jotting down notes when I could. Carl became my reluctant mentor. He didn't just teach me about law. He taught me about tracing money, something he'd done for his old crew. "Money always leaves a trail," he said, pointing to a page of notes on money laundering. "If someone sets you up, they can't hide forever." I started thinking about Jason, the stacks of cash I'd seen him with, the late-night calls, the sports car he drove despite having no steady job. I remembered his averted gaze when the police showed up, the way he'd bowed his head as if he knew what was coming. And then I recalled Mom's words. Jason wouldn't survive it. A piece of the puzzle began to form, but it was too painful to accept. My family hadn't just abandoned me. They were complicit. The more I read, the more a small spark of determination flickered inside me. Not anger, but resolve. If I had to be here, I wouldn't drown in despair. I got access to the prison library, borrowing books on law, accounting, and old articles about drug cases. I took meticulous notes day after day, night after night, on scraps of paper Carl gave me. I learned to analyze financial transactions, to spot holes in business records. Carl watched me, sometimes nodding, sometimes smiling. "You've got potential, Jacob," he said, "but be careful. The law is a double-edged sword." By the third month, I started keeping a journal, not to vent, but to record everything I remembered about Jason. The late-night calls, the secret meetings in the backyard, the crypto project he bragged about. I didn't know what I'd do with these notes, but they made me feel like I still had some control, however small. One day, a letter arrived. It was from Mom, her shaky handwriting scrawled on yellow-lined paper. She wrote that she missed me, that she prayed for me every day. But not a single apology, not a word of explanation. She only asked if I was okay and mentioned that Jason was doing well in business, that he'd just bought a new TV for the house. I read it, folded the letter, and tucked it under the corner of my mattress. I didn't reply, not because I was angry, but because I didn't know what to say to someone who'd chosen my brother over me. Carl saw me sitting quietly and asked, "Family?" I nodded. He shrugged. "Family can be your strength, but it can also be your weakest link. You have to choose. Live for them or live for yourself." I looked at him, then at the law book in my hands. For the first time, I felt like I had an answer. 18 months passed, and I was no longer the Jacob who'd first walked into this prison. I was thinner, my hair longer, but my eyes were different. I wasn't the resigned older brother ready to sacrifice for family. I'd learned to see the world through the lens of law and truth. As my release date approached, I knew I wouldn't return to my old life. Jason, Mom, Dad, they'd pushed me into this place, but I would walk out stronger than they ever imagined. The day I walked out of Multnomah County Jail, the Portland sky was a dull gray, with a light drizzle stinging my face like tiny needles. I stood in front of the iron gate, wearing an old hoodie and tattered sneakers handed back by the guard, clutching a plastic bag with my few belongings. A worn notebook, a pen, and a faded family photo with creased corners. I looked around, foolishly hoping someone would be waiting, Mom, Dad, or even Jason. But the road outside was empty, save for the rumble of a passing truck and the smell of wet asphalt. I took a deep breath, a mix of freedom and loneliness washing over me like a wave. 18 months in prison had changed me, but the world outside didn't seem to care. I walked to the nearest bus stop, the plastic bag rustling in my hand. No one knew I was getting out today because I hadn't told anyone. Mom had sent another letter a few months back, asking if I was okay, mentioning that Jason had rented a new apartment downtown. Not a word of apology, not a hint of explanation. I didn't reply. Not out of anger, but because prison had taught me something. Family isn't everything, and I couldn't live just to please them anymore. I found a job at a small coffee shop called Brew Haven, tucked away on Belmont Street, a few miles from downtown Portland. The work was simple: brewing coffee, wiping tables, and chatting just enough with customers to keep them happy. The owner, a middle-aged guy named Ray, didn't ask about my past. "You work hard, that's enough," he said when he handed me my uniform. I nodded, feeling for the first time in my life that someone was looking at me without comparing me to Jason. By day, I stood behind the counter, learning to make lattes and listening to customers ramble about their petty dramas. By night, I returned to my new rented apartment. A room even smaller than my cell, with creaky wooden floors and a window overlooking a parking lot. But it was mine, and that was enough to make me feel like I was starting over. In that room, I opened my prison notebook, its pages filled with handwritten notes on law, accounting, and fragments of memories about Jason. I didn't know what I'd do with them, but I knew I couldn't let the past bury me. One evening after my shift, I sat in front of an old laptop I'd bought from a secondhand shop and started searching. I typed Jason Miller into Google, and a slew of articles popped up. Young entrepreneur with big potential, breakout crypto startup, glossy headlines about Jason's company, JM Ventures. I clicked on one, seeing a photo of Jason in a sharp gray suit, flashing that same confident smile. His company, the article said, specialized in cryptocurrency investments, promising high returns for investors. But something felt off. Jason, the kid who'd blown through our parents' savings on a sports car, was now a successful entrepreneur? I didn't buy it. I remembered Carl's words from prison. Money always leaves a trail. I dug deeper, using the skills he'd taught me. I looked up JM Ventures records on the Oregon Secretary of State's website. Public documents showed the company was registered a year ago after I'd gone to prison. Jason was listed as CEO, but there were other names on the board, people I'd never heard of. I searched further, scouring Reddit forums about crypto where users discussed shady projects. One anonymous post mentioned JM Ventures, calling it a Ponzi scheme in disguise. My heart raced. I didn't know what a Ponzi scheme was, but I could guess. I wrote down everything: the company's name, registration date, and forum comments. I started learning to read financial statements. Though they were more complex than I'd expected, I borrowed books from the public library, Basic Accounting, Understanding Money Laundering, and spent hours each night analyzing them. I wasn't an expert, but I knew how to be patient. 18 months in prison had taught me that. One night, I nearly got caught. I was sitting in a small bar near JM Ventures' office, pretending to sip a beer while keeping an eye out. Jason walked in, not alone. He was with a tall guy in a leather jacket, his head shaved close. They sat in a dim corner, speaking in hushed tones. I saw Jason pull out a thick envelope and slide it across the table. The other guy checked it quickly, nodded, and left. My heart pounded. I ducked my head, pulling my cap low, afraid Jason would spot me. Luckily, he didn't look my way. But as he left the bar, I saw his eyes, tense, anxious, nothing like the confident entrepreneur. I went home, my hands shaking as I wrote down what I'd seen. The envelope, Jason's expression, the name JM Ventures. It was all starting to connect. I dug deeper online, this time into crypto transactions. I found a blockchain wallet linked to JM Ventures with a series of transfers to offshore accounts, places like the Cayman Islands, which Carl had called a haven for money laundering. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but each piece of information was a puzzle piece, and I knew I was getting closer to the truth. From that day on, I worked, studied, and investigated. Every night I sat at my laptop, organizing my notes into a file. JM Ventures transactions, the shady names, the blockchain wallet addresses. I didn't know what I'd do with it all, but I knew I couldn't stop. Jason had put me in prison and my family had left me to rot. Now I would be the one to decide my own fate. The rain kept falling lightly outside the window of my small apartment, droplets sliding down the glass, blurring like the memories I tried to forget. I sat in front of my old laptop, the blue glow of the screen casting light on my face, illuminating the scattered stack of notes on the table. Those pages, filled with handwritten lines, numbers, and blockchain wallet addresses, were the result of months of relentless work. They were my weapon, not a gun or a knife, but the truth, meticulously organized like a deck of cards ready to take down Jason. I was no longer the Jacob Miller of 18 months ago, the submissive older brother who went to prison for someone else's crime. I had learned to see the world through Carl's lens, the prison friend who told me, money always leaves a trail. And Jason, my little brother, had left far too many trails. His company, JM Ventures, wasn't the promising crypto startup the articles hyped it up to be. It was a front, a complex money laundering machine, and I had spent every night unraveling it. It all started with small pieces. After that night, I nearly got caught at the bar. I became more cautious. I stopped going near JM Ventures' office and focused on gathering information remotely. I scoured public websites, checked company records on the Oregon Secretary of State's site, and dug deep into crypto forums on Reddit and Telegram. An anonymous Reddit post hinted that JM Ventures was involved in shady transactions, and I followed that lead. I uncovered a chain of blockchain transactions from JM Ventures' wallet, funneled through dozens of intermediary accounts, ultimately landing in offshore banks in the Cayman Islands. Carl had told me about places like that, havens for money launderers. I wasn't an expert, but I was patient. I spent hours analyzing transactions, cross-referencing them with JM Ventures' public financial reports. I found discrepancies, suspiciously high revenues, unexplained expenses, and investments with no clear contracts. I documented everything day after day, hour after hour, on pages now filled with ink. I also found names of people involved, investors in Jason's company, who upon further research turned out to be individuals previously investigated for drug trafficking in Seattle and Los Angeles. The final piece was a leaked email on a hacker forum where Jason promised delivery on time to someone named Rico. I didn't know who Rico was, but the word delivery sent a chill down my spine. It brought me back to that fateful night when Jason asked me to deliver a package. I knew I had to act, but I had to be careful. If I confronted Jason directly, he'd deny everything and my family would side with him again. I didn't want a loud fight. I wanted the truth to speak for itself, to defeat Jason in a way no one could dispute. I started building an anonymous dossier, a thick file of every piece of evidence I'd collected. Blockchain transactions, company records, the leaked email, and the list of questionable investors. I organized them chronologically, clearly labeled, just as Carl had taught me. If you want to take down an enemy, do it professionally, he'd said. One night I sat in front of my laptop, my hand hovering over the keyboard. I had found the email addresses for the IRS, the DEA, and the local prosecutor's office in Portland. I wrote an anonymous letter, short but clear. I have evidence of money laundering and drug trafficking activities related to JM Ventures, a company in Portland. Please review the attached documents. I attached a PDF of the entire dossier, double-checking every page to ensure I left no trace of myself. I used a temporary email created through an anonymous service and hit send. When I did, my heart pounded, but not from fear. It was relief, like dropping a heavy stone from my chest. Then I waited. I kept working at Brewhaven, brewing coffee, wiping tables, and smiling at customers as if nothing was happening. But every day I checked the news, scouring local papers and crypto forums. A month passed, then two. I started to think my dossier had been ignored, that Jason was too clever to get caught. But then one morning, as I was making a latte for a customer, my phone buzzed with a news alert about JM Ventures. I opened my laptop, searching for more, and there it was on the front page of the Oregonian. Startup JM Ventures under investigation for suspected money laundering. The article said the IRS and DEA had frozen the company's accounts and Jason Miller, the CEO, was being questioned. I read it over and over, feeling like my heart had stopped. It had begun. Within days, everything crumbled like a sandcastle. Jason was arrested at his office, images of him in handcuffs, face pale, flashing across the evening news. JM Ventures investors sued the company, demanding their money back. Rumors spread like wildfire on crypto forums, calling JM Ventures Portland's biggest scam. I sat in my apartment watching the news and felt a strange calm, not gloating satisfaction, but the sense that justice had been served. A week later, I read that Jason had been charged with money laundering and second-degree drug trafficking, facing up to 15 years in prison. I also heard from an old friend near my parents' house that Mom and Dad had to mortgage their home to pay for a lawyer, but I knew it was futile. The dossier I'd sent was too tight, too clear. Jason couldn't escape. After learning that my brother had been sentenced to 15 years in prison, I decided to visit him in jail and tell him the truth. It was a beautiful Saturday morning, and I wore my familiar gray hoodie, a baseball cap, and carried the notebook that had been with me since my days in prison. I didn't call ahead or give any warning. Jason didn't know I'd been released, didn't know what I was doing or how I was living. He'd never asked, never cared. His indifference didn't surprise me, but it still stung, like an old wound that hadn't healed. At the prison gate, I filled out the visitor form as family. The guard recognized me. He asked how I was doing before leading me down a long hallway. The familiar smell of mildew, metal, and despair hit me, bringing back memories of the months I'd spent locked up here. I was taken to the visitation room, a small space divided by thick glass. I sat down, staring through the pane, waiting. My heart pounded, but not out of fear. I was ready. Jason walked in wearing an orange prison jumpsuit, much thinner than the last time I saw him. His hair was disheveled, his eyes sunken, his face pale and lifeless. When he saw me, his eyes widened in shock. "Jacob," he whispered through the microphone, his voice hoarse. You're out? Why are you here?" I looked at him, not answering right away. Jason sat down, his hands clasped tightly on the table, his eyes flickering between confusion and anxiety. "I've been out for 3 months," I said, my voice calm. "But you didn't know, did you? You didn't ask, didn't care. Just like Mom and Dad." Jason lowered his head, his lips pressed tight. I continued, my voice steady. "I'm not here to forgive you. I'm here so you know the truth. I'm the one who sent the dossier to the IRS and DEA. I found everything. JM Ventures, the dirty money, Rico, all of it. I put you here." Jason looked up, his face ashen. "You, what?" he stammered, as if he couldn't believe it. "Why, Jacob, I'm your brother." I gave a dry laugh, feeling like my heart was being squeezed. "Brother?" I repeated. "You let me rot in prison for 2 years for your crime. You didn't call, didn't write, didn't once ask how I was. Did you think I'd always be the pushover big brother?" Jason broke down crying, but I felt no pity. "I didn't want this," he said, his voice trembling. "They forced me, Jacob. The people I worked with. They said if I didn't throw the police off, they'd kill me. Mom and Dad said you'd be fine, that you were stronger." "Stronger," I cut him off, my voice sharp as a blade. "That's their excuse and yours. But the truth is, you chose yourself and they chose you. I had to pick myself up." I paused, looking straight into his eyes. "Now you have to pay, Jason. Not because of me, but because of what you did." Jason bowed his head, sobbing. I stood up, saying nothing more. "Take care of yourself," I said, then walked out of the room. His cries echoed behind the glass, but I didn't look back. I'd given him a chance and he'd abandoned me. Now it was time to let go. A few days later, I drove to the old neighborhood where my parents' house once felt like the center of my world. Now it looked worn, its paint peeling, the iron fence rusted. I didn't call or warn them. They didn't know I was out of prison, didn't know what I was doing. Their silence, no calls, no letters in 18 months, was proof enough. I knocked on the door, my heart pounding, not from fear, but because I knew this was the last time I'd face them. Mom opened the door, her hair grayer than I remembered, her face etched with worry lines. She froze when she saw me, her hand trembling on the doorknob. "Jacob," she whispered, as if seeing a ghost. What are you doing here? You're out?" Dad appeared behind her, his eyes tired, his hair now fully white. "Jacob," he said, his voice low. "Why didn't you say anything?" I looked at them, the two people who once meant everything to me, now as distant as strangers. "I've been out for 3 months," I said calmly. "But you didn't know because you didn't ask. You didn't care, did you? Only Jason mattered." Mom burst into tears, but I didn't waver. "Jacob, I'm sorry," she said, her voice breaking. But Jason, he's in despair. He's been sentenced to 15 years. You're smart, you educational, you know the law. Can you help him? Dad nodded, his eyes pleading. You're his brother, Jacob. Family helps each other. I shook my head, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. I used to be his brother, I said. But when you chose him over me, when you let me go to prison for his crime, I learned to live for myself. I paused, looking them in the eyes. And you know what? I'm the one who put Jason in prison. I found everything, the dirty money, the transactions, all of it. I sent the evidence to the IRS and DEA. I did it for justice. Mom collapsed into a chair, hands covering her face, sobbing. Dad stood frozen, his eyes misty as if he couldn't believe it. How could you? He whispered. He's your brother. I gave a dry laugh, my voice steady. I stopped being his brother and your son the day you let me take the fall for him. I turned and walked out. Mom called after me, her voice desperate. Jacob, come back. But I didn't stop. I stepped into the street, the rare Portland sunlight filtering through the trees, the breeze carrying the scent of dry leaves and coming rain. I didn't look back, didn't think of Jason, Mom, or Dad. I just kept walking, clutching my notebook filled with plans for my own coffee shop. A faint smile on my lips. Justice had been served, and this time I wrote the ending.